The envelope moved across the Christmas table so quietly it barely made a sound. Ethan's mother pushed it forward with 2 fingers, sliding it right between the bowl of maple-glazed sweet potatoes and the basket of warm dinner rolls, as if she were offering me a second helping of something harmless. Her smile never slipped. It stayed polished, small, and cold. "We believe this is the wisest step," she said, "before the wedding goes any further." For 1 full second, no one at the table moved. The Christmas tree in the corner blinked silver red, silver red. Somewhere beyond the dining room, a kitchen timer clicked softly. Ethan lowered his eyes to his plate. His father folded his hands in front of him like we were seated in a boardroom instead of gathered for Christmas dinner. His sister raised her wine glass and took a slow sip, pretending she was not fascinated. I placed my palm on the envelope, but I did not open it immediately. I already knew what was inside before I ever saw the first page. A contract. Not the kind people use to make things fair. The kind people use when they want to remind you exactly where they think you stand. By that point in my life, I had spent almost 2 decades in the United States Marine Corps. I had stood in rooms where generals made decisions with life and death consequences. I had buried brave men. I had written letters to grieving families. I had learned what real power looked like. More importantly, I had learned how small people behaved when they believed someone else had none. And still, sitting at that Christmas table in my oldest wool coat, I felt something colder and sharper than rage. Not because of the contract, because Ethan had known. I could see it in the way he refused to look at me. That was the moment. That was the night. That was the exact second I understood that before I married this man, I had to decide whether love could survive when courage was missing. But that was not where it started. It started 3 weeks earlier, on a gray December morning, with Ethan standing in my kitchen, holding a mug of coffee and smiling at me like the world was still uncomplicated. "I want you to come to Christmas dinner," he said. "My parents are finally ready to really meet you." I was standing at the counter in socks, reading an early briefing packet before driving to base. The townhouse I owned in a quiet neighborhood outside Camp Lejeune was warm, simple, and orderly. There was no expensive art on the walls, no showy furniture, nothing that would tell a casual visitor that the woman who lived there earned a strong military salary and held a rank most men twice her age never reached. I kept my life that way deliberately. Ethan believed I worked in an administrative office connected to the base. He had never said the word clerk cruelly. Honestly, he always said it with kindness, like he respected that I was steady, grounded, and unpretentious. He thought I handled files, reports, calendars, scheduling, something small, something quiet. I had allowed him to believe that. Not because I enjoyed lying. I didn't. But after years of being saluted, deferred to, examined, and judged by the stars on my uniform, I had grown desperate for the one thing authority could never seem to give me: affection that wasn't guarded. I wanted one person in my life who saw me before he saw my rank. So I never corrected him. I was 38 years old, a major general in the United States Marine Corps, with responsibilities that would have stunned him if he had known the full scope of them. My monthly pay was a little over $18,000 before taxes and deductions. I owned my home. I had my retirement accounts, my investments, and enough savings that if I had left the service the next morning, I could have lived modestly and comfortably for the rest of my life. But none of that mattered to me half as much as character. "Really meet me?" I asked. Ethan laughed. "You know what I mean." I looked up from the briefing packet. I thought I already met them. "You met them for 10 minutes at that charity gala," he said, and my mother was distracted. "This will be different. Just family. Christmas. Relaxed." I remember the tiny pause before I answered. Ethan noticed it too. "What?" he asked. "Your mother didn't seem distracted," I said. "She seemed disappointed." He gave me that helpless half-smile of his, the one he used whenever he wanted to smooth over discomfort without actually touching it. "She just doesn't know you yet." That was Ethan's way. In many ordinary, everyday ways, he was a good man. He remembered exactly how I liked my coffee. He checked the oil in my car without making a show of it. He took his suits to the cleaners on time. He sent flowers to widows from church. He called his aunt every Sunday evening. He carried my groceries in without being asked. But Ethan had grown up in a family where keeping things Pleasant mattered more than telling the truth plainly. Especially around his parents, he shrank himself. He did not exactly lie. He simply allowed things to go unchallenged until they settled into fact. "When is dinner?" I asked. "Christmas Eve," he said. "My sister and her husband will be there too." I set the packet down and turned fully toward him. "And what exactly have you told them about me?" His brows lifted a little too fast. "That you work on base." "That's all?" He shrugged, more or less. It would have been easy right then to tell him, to say, "Ethan, I am not an office assistant. I am a major general in the United States Marine Corps, and if your parents are worried about whether I can take care of myself, the answer is yes." But something in me resisted. Not pride, curiosity. By then, I had spent enough time around wealth, real wealth, inherited wealth, nervous wealth, polished wealth, to understand that many people were not measured by what they owned, but by how they treated those they believed owned less. Ethan's family came from old East Coast comfort. Not billionaire money, not dynastic money, but the kind of money that lived in private clubs, careful haircuts, family foundations, and the quiet conviction that reputation needed to be protected from embarrassment. I had watched women like his mother all my life. Sweet voice, sharp eyes, generous in public, exacting in private, and suddenly, before I married her son, I wanted to see something clearly. "All right," I said, "I'll come." Ethan's face softened with relief. He came over and kissed my forehead. "You'll see. It'll be nice." I smiled back, but I did not answer. After he left for work, I stood alone in the kitchen for a long moment, the briefing packet forgotten on the counter, and my coffee cooling in my hand. Then I went upstairs, opened my closet, and looked past the tailored coats and formal dresses I wore when military functions required them. I chose the oldest coat I owned. Brown wool, still respectable, but worn thin at the cuffs. A coat my mother would have called decent, and other women might have called tired. My mother had raised me in a small town in South Carolina. My father died when I was young, and my mother worked in the county records office for 26 years, wearing practical shoes and saving every receipt in envelopes, labeled by month. She used to tell me, "A woman with good character doesn't need to announce herself. The world will do the announcing in time." She also used to say, "If you want to know who people really are, let them believe you can't do a thing for them." I heard her voice that morning as clearly as church bells, so I made a decision. I would go to Christmas dinner dressed plainly. No jewelry except my watch, no visible authority, no hints. I would keep my voice gentle, answer simply, and let them decide who I was. Not because I wanted revenge. Not yet. Because I wanted the truth. The weeks before Christmas passed in the usual blur of duty and December obligations. There were ceremonies, budget meetings, personnel reviews, and the annual ache that settles over military communities during the holidays, when everyone is aware of who is deployed, who is grieving, who is coming home, and who is not. In public, I carried myself the way I always did, calm, direct, self-contained. On base, people stood when I entered a room. Men twice my age chose their words carefully around me. In a single afternoon, I might approve travel orders, review a disciplinary recommendation, and call the widow of a staff officer. By evening, I was home watering a small fern beside my living room window and warming soup on the stove. It suited me. Ethan came over often. One Sunday afternoon, we decorated my small artificial Christmas tree. He brought peppermint bark from a local shop. He talked about his office holiday party, his niece's choir concert, and his mother's obsession with the table setting that year. "She has this special china she only uses on Christmas Eve," he said. "My dad carves the ham like he's performing a sacred ritual." "That sounds lovely," I said. He hesitated. "You're nervous." "No," I said. "I'm observant." He laughed, but something in his expression tightened. A few nights later, he was flipping through channels in my living room when he said too casually, "If my parents ask about your future, don't take it personally." I looked up from the armchair where I was sewing a loosed button back onto a cardigan. "What does that mean? You know, they're practical people." "Practical about what?" He shifted. "Marriage. Money, stability." I threaded the needle slowly. "Ethan, do your parents think I'm unstable?" No. He sat up. "Not unstable. They just like to know where things stand." That was the second warning. Enough that any sensible woman would have pressed harder. I didn't. I only nodded and kept sewing. Christmas Eve afternoon was bright and bitterly cold. I dressed carefully for the role I had chosen. Dark skirt, plain blouse, low heels, my oldest coat, no earrings, no makeup except enough to keep from looking tired. I pinned my hair simply and left it that way. When I looked in the mirror, I saw exactly what I wanted them to see. A quiet woman, pleasant enough. Forgettable if you were foolish. Ethan picked me up just before 5. He wore a navy sweater and looked handsome in that open, earnest way that had drawn me to him in the beginning. He carried the pie I had baked and complimented my coat, which told me he truly did not see what I was doing. On the drive to his parents' house, Christmas lights glowed over porches and shrubs. Suburban Virginia at Christmas has a particular kind of order to it. Wreaths on almost every door, winter lawns clipped short, battery candles glowing in front windows, the sense that people are trying very hard to manufacture warmth on schedule. Ethan reached over and touched my hand. "Thank you for doing this." "Of course," I said. "You'll like them more once you know them." I turned my face toward the dark glass of the passenger window. Maybe. Their house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, large without being vulgar. White columns, black shutters, brass lanterns beside the door. The kind of house that had hosted many holidays and wanted you to understand it had hosted them well. Ethan pulled into the driveway. Through the front window, I could see the glow of a tall Christmas tree and shadows moving inside. I took one breath, then another. Not because I was afraid of them, because I had that strange stillness inside me that sometimes comes before a storm, and I knew this night was going to tell me something final. Ethan came around to open my door, pie in one hand, smile already in place. I stepped out, buttoned my old coat against the cold, and walked beside him to the porch. From inside, I could already hear laughter. Then the door opened. The woman standing there smiled the way people do when they have already reached a verdict. "Ethan," she said warmly, leaning in to kiss his cheek, then her eyes moved to me. "Quick, measuring this must be you." Her voice held on to the last word just a little too long. "Mom, this is," Ethan began. "I remember," she said, gently cutting him off. "We met briefly." She stepped aside to let us in. The house was exactly what I expected. Polished hardwood floors, a tall Christmas tree dressed in gold ribbon and glass ornaments, the faint scent of cinnamon, cloves, and baked ham hanging in the air. Everything was arranged perfectly, the way people arrange a life they expect others to admire. "Let me take your coat," she said, reaching for mine. I hesitated for the smallest moment, then let her have it. Her fingers brushed the sleeve, and I saw the almost invisible flicker in her face when she felt the worn wool. Not disgust, not quite. Confirmation. She hung it carefully, as if it might shed. "This way," she said. We moved into the living room, where Ethan's father stood near the fireplace with one hand resting on the mantel. He was tall, in his early 70s, straight-backed, with the kind of posture that comes from a lifetime of believing he has earned his place in every room. "Dad," Ethan said, "this is—" "Yes, yes," his father said, extending his hand to me. "Welcome." His grip was firm. His smile was practiced. His eyes, like his wife's, did their work quickly. My clothes, my shoes, my posture, all catalogued in seconds. "Good to finally have you here," he added. "Thank you for inviting me," I said. Behind him, a younger woman approached with a glass of wine in her hand. Ethan's sister. She was beautifully dressed, her hair perfectly done, her smile bright in a way that felt rehearsed. "So this is the mystery woman," she said lightly. "I've heard so much. I doubted that." Her husband came a step behind her, quieter, watching. "Can I get you something to drink?" Ethan's mother asked. "Water would be fine," I said. "Just water?" His sister asked, amusement tucked into the edges of her voice. "It's Christmas." "I'm driving later," I said. That was not entirely true, but it was simple. His mother returned with a glass of water and handed it to me with careful politeness. "Dinner will be ready in a few minutes. Why don't we sit?" We moved into the living room. Conversation began easily enough, but it did not feel natural. Questions came my way, but they all leaned in one direction. "So Ethan tells us you work on base," his father said, settling into his chair. "Yes," I said. "What sort of work?" he asked. "Administrative," I answered. He nodded slowly as if he had placed me neatly into a box he understood. "That must be steady," he said. "It is," I replied. Ethan's sister leaned forward a little. "Do you enjoy it?" "I value the structure," I said. That seemed to satisfy her. or at least confirm whatever she had already decided. Ethan tried to keep the conversation moving. He talked about work, about a project he was finishing, about a trip we might take in the spring. His mother listened to him with a warm smile, her attention full and tender whenever it rested on her son. When it returned to me, it cooled. "And your family?" she asked. "My mother passed a few years ago," I said. "I don't have siblings." "Oh," she said softly, tilting her head. "That must be difficult." "It was," I said. There was a pause. Not sympathy, recalculation, no family, no support, less structure. His father cleared his throat. "Well, it's good you have Ethan now." I took a sip of water. "Yes," I said evenly. "It is." Dinner was announced a moment later, and we moved into the dining room. The table was beautiful. White china with a thin gold rim, crystal glasses. Cloth napkins folded just so. A centerpiece of pine branches, red berries, and candles. It was the kind of table my mother would have admired, then quietly worried about scratching. We took our seats. Ethan sat beside me. His parents sat across from us. His sister and her husband took the ends of the table. The meal began with grace. His father bowed his head and gave thanks for family, blessings, the year behind us, and the year ahead. His words were sincere, practiced, and complete. When he finished, everyone lifted their heads. "Please," his mother said. "Eat. The food was good, very good. Ham glazed perfectly, sweet potatoes rich and soft, green beans with sliced almonds, rolls warm and light. Everything had been prepared with care." But the conversation never settled. "So," his mother said after a few minutes, turning to me again, "do you plan to continue working after the wedding?" "Yes," I said. "In the same position?" she asked. "For now," I replied. She nodded and exchanged a quick glance with her husband. "I only ask," she continued, "because Ethan has worked very hard to build a certain lifestyle. Stability matters." "I agree," I said. His sister smiled faintly. "Of course, sometimes priorities change after marriage." "Sometimes," I said. Ethan shifted beside me. I could feel the tension in his arm. "They're just trying to get to know you," he murmured. "I understand," I said. His father set down his fork. "And what about long-term plans?" he asked. "Savings, retirement, things of that nature." "I have a plan," I said. He smiled thinly. "I'm sure you do. It's just that these things become more important when two people are building a life together." "Yes," I said again, "they do." There it was. Not outright insult, not yet, but the steady construction of a story. A woman of modest means, limited prospects, a possible risk. Ethan tried to shift the conversation again, but his mother brought it back. "We have seen situations before," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "where intentions are good, but differences in background create complications." I looked at her. "What kind of complications?" "Oh," she said lightly, "expectations, financial habits, responsibilities." "And how those responsibilities are shared," his father added. I folded my hands in my lap. "Shared how?" His mother smiled, equitably. The word hung over the table. Ethan cleared his throat. "Mom, it's a reasonable conversation," she said. "Yes," I said calmly, "it is." And then it happened. His father leaned back slightly. His mother reached beside her chair. The room quieted in a way that had nothing to do with food. She placed an envelope on the table, and with 2 fingers she slid it toward me. "We believe this is the wisest step," she said, "before the wedding goes any further." This time, I did not wait. I opened it. The first page was exactly what I expected, a prenuptial agreement. But as I read, I saw more than legal language. I saw assumptions. That I would contribute little, that I might become dependent, that I might take, that I needed to be managed before I could be welcomed into their family. I read every line carefully. No one spoke. When I reached the end of the first page, I turned to the next. There were notes in the margins in his mother's handwriting. Important. Must discuss before venue deposit. I closed the document slowly. Only then did I look up. Ethan was staring at his plate. He had not said a word. I rested my hands lightly on the table, and for the first time that evening, I allowed a silence to settle. Not the silence of awkwardness, the silence of recognition. They believed this was about money. They believed this was about protection. They believed I was the danger. I looked at Ethan, then at his parents, and I understood with perfect clarity. This was not the moment I had been welcomed into their family. This was the moment they had decided who I was allowed to be. They had made their move. They had no idea they had chosen the wrong woman. I let the silence remain longer than most people would have. Long enough discomfort to enter the room and take a seat, long enough for each of them to wonder what I would do. Then I placed my fingertips lightly on the edge of the envelope and said, very calmly, "When was this prepared?" Ethan's mother straightened by a fraction. "A few weeks ago." I turned my eyes to Ethan. "You knew about it," he swallowed. "We talked about it. I didn't think. You didn't think I should be told?" I asked. "It's not like that," he said quickly. "I just didn't want to upset you before the holidays." His father leaned forward. "There's no reason to make this adversarial. This is simply a precaution." "Standard, really." "Standard for whom?" I asked. "For families in our position," he said. I nodded once, as if that explained something. "And what position is that?" I asked. His sister shifted in her chair. "Dad just means people who have something to protect." "I see," I said. I opened the document again and returned to the first page. "And you believe I do not?" No one answered directly. Ethan's mother gave me a soft, measured smile. "We don't know enough about your financial situation. That's exactly the point. These matters are best clarified beforehand." "Clarified," I repeated. I turned another page, scanning the language. Separate property clauses, limits on future claims, provisions that felt less like mutual protection and more like a fence built before I had even entered the yard. "And who prepared this?" I asked. "Our family attorney," his father said. "For both parties?" I asked. A pause. "Well," he said, "our attorney prepared the initial document. Naturally, you would be free to have your own counsel review it." "Of course," I said quietly. I closed the document again and rested my hands on top of it. Ethan reached for his water glass and took a sip he did not seem to need. His hand trembled slightly. "It's not personal," he said. "They would ask this of anyone." I turned my head slowly and looked at him. "Would you?" I asked. He hesitated. "That's not fair," he said. "No," I agreed. "It isn't." His mother leaned forward, still gentle, but firmer now. "We are not accusing you of anything. We are simply trying to be responsible. Marriage is not only emotional, it is practical." "I agree," I said. Her smile returned, relieved. "Then you understand?" "I understand that you believe you are being practical," I said. "What I'm still trying to understand is what, exactly, you believe you are protecting your son from." The words landed more directly than anything I had said all evening. His father's expression tightened. "From complications," he said, "from misunderstandings, from situations that become difficult to unwind later." "Difficult for whom?" I asked. "For everyone involved," he replied. I nodded again, as if this were a conversation I intended to take seriously. Because I did. I slid the envelope a few inches back toward myself, not rejecting it, not accepting it, simply keeping it in place. "And Ethan," I said, turning back to him, "you agreed to this." "I didn't agree," he said quickly. "I just didn't stop it." "That is the same thing," I said. He flinched slightly, like a man who had just felt the weight of a decision he had tried to call small. I let the silence return for one breath. Then I asked, evenly, "What is the current value of Ethan's trust?" The air in the room changed instantly. His father blinked. "I'm sorry?" "You mentioned protection," I said. "I assume that includes existing assets. So I'm asking, what is the current value of his trust?" Ethan's sister gave a short, startled laugh. "That's a little direct, don't you think?" "I'm being practical," I said. His father's mouth tightened. "That is not something we discuss casually. And yet you are asking me to sign a legal document that would affect my future based on that very information," I said. "So I don't see how it can remain undisclosed." No one spoke for a moment. I continued, my voice unchanged. "Is the house in Ethan's name, or is it held through a family trust?" "That is not relevant," his father said. "It is if we're discussing marital property," I replied. Ethan shifted in his chair. "We don't need to get into all of that tonight." "We don't?" I asked. His mother stepped in quickly. "This is exactly why we wanted to have the conversation early, so expectations would be clear." "Clear for whom?" I asked again. Her smile thinned. I let my gaze travel across the table, taking in each of them. "I'm also curious," I said, "about Ethan's outstanding liabilities." Ethan's head snapped up. "What?" "You have a credit line attached to the business you started 2 years ago," I said. "Has that been fully resolved?" The color drained from his face. His sister looked sharply at him. "What is she talking about?" "It's nothing," Ethan said quickly. "It's handled." "Is it?" I asked, still calm. His father frowned. "How would you know about that?" I met his eyes. "Because I listen," I said. The room had gone completely still. No one was eating anymore. The Christmas tree blinked softly in the corner. Ethan stared at me, confusion and something like fear mixing behind his eyes. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. I considered that for a moment. "Because you asked me to take this seriously," I said. His mother placed her fork down with care. "This feels unnecessary, does it?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "We are attempting to approach this respectfully and in a structured manner." "And I am responding in the same manner," I said. Her expression hardened just a fraction. "You're being defensive." "I'm being thorough," I replied. His father leaned back and studied me now with a different kind of attention. "What exactly do you do on base?" he asked. There it was. Not curiosity, recalculation. I held his gaze. "More than file paperwork," I said. Ethan released a quiet breath. Can we just slow down for a second?" "No," I said gently. "I don't think we should." He looked at me, startled. "Because this moment matters," I continued. "And if we move past it too quickly, we'll pretend it didn't happen the way it actually happened." His mother folded her hands in front of her. "We have treated you with respect," she said. I looked at her for a long moment. "No," I said quietly. "You have treated me with caution." The difference seemed to land. No one spoke. I placed my hand lightly on the document again. "You are not wrong to want clarity," I said. "You are not wrong to want fairness. Those are reasonable things." His father's shoulders loosened slightly, as if he believed we were moving toward agreement. "But fairness requires information," I continued, "on both sides." I slid the document a little farther back toward the center of the table. "And right now," I said, "you don't have mine." Ethan's mother frowned. "Then perhaps this is the time to share it." I looked at her, then at Ethan, and in that moment, I understood something with absolute certainty. They still believed this conversation was happening on their terms. They still believed they were setting the conditions. They still believed I was the one who needed to prove something. I took a slow breath, and for the first time that evening, I allowed myself to consider what would happen next. Not as a reaction, as a decision. I straightened slightly in my chair. Then I said calmly, all right, I repeated, firmer this time, so there would be no misunderstanding. I folded my hands neatly on top of the contract. If we are going to have a serious conversation about fairness, then we should do it properly. Ethan's mother nodded once, relieved, as if she believed I was finally stepping into the role she had prepared for me. Yes, she said, that is exactly what we are asking. I looked at Ethan first. Before I answer anything else, I said, I need to understand something. He met my eyes uneasily. Okay, why didn't you stop this? I asked. He swallowed. I told you, I didn't want to cause a scene. A scene? I repeated quietly. I thought if we could just get through dinner, we could talk about it afterward, privately, without all this. All this, I said, glancing at the document, was already decided. The only thing you postponed was telling me. He did not answer. I let that sit between us. Then I turned to his parents. You said you want clarity, I continued, so let me offer some. I sat back slightly, not in defiance but in composure. I am 38 years old, I said. I have supported myself since I was 18. I have no personal debt. I own my home. I maintain my own retirement accounts. I do not depend on Ethan for financial security, and I do not need access to your family's assets in order to live comfortably. Ethan's sister blinked in surprise. His father's eyes narrowed as he reassessed me. And as for my work, I added, you are correct that I am on base. I paused just long enough for the understatement to register, but not in the way you assumed. Ethan leaned forward slightly. What do you mean? I looked at him. Then at his parents, and I spoke plainly. I am a major general in the United States Marine Corps. For a moment, no one reacted. It was too far outside what they had expected. Then Ethan's sister gave a short, disbelieving laugh. I'm sorry, what? I am a 2-star general, I said, my voice calm and even. I command personnel, oversee operations, and make decisions that carry legal, financial, and human consequences. My responsibility extends far beyond administrative duties. Ethan stared at me. You're serious, he said. Yes. His mother's expression shifted. Confusion gave way to something sharper. That is not something one simply hides. I didn't hide it, I said. I simply didn't lead with it. His father leaned forward, studying me in a way he had not before. If that is true, he said slowly, then why am I sitting here in an old coat? I finished it for him. He did not answer. I gave him the courtesy of completing the thought anyway, because I wanted to know how you would treat someone you believed had nothing to offer you. The words settled into the room like a stone dropped into still water. Ethan looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. You never told me, he said quietly. No, I agreed. I didn't. Why? He asked. I held his gaze. Because I wanted one relationship in my life that wasn't shaped by rank, I said. I wanted to know whether I could be known as a person before I was known as a title. His mother shook her head slightly. This feels misleading. Does it? I asked. Yes, she said. You allowed us to believe something that wasn't true. I allowed you to believe something you never bothered to question, I replied. His father sat back slowly. And now? He asked. Now, I said. We're having the conversation you wanted, with all the information on the table. I lifted the document and tapped it lightly. This agreement, I continued, is not unreasonable by nature. Prenuptial agreements can serve a purpose when both parties enter them with full knowledge, independent counsel, and mutual respect. His mother nodded too quickly. Exactly. But this, I said, opening it again and turning it so they could see, is not that. I pointed to one clause. This section assumes a disparity of income and restricts future claims accordingly. That assumption is incorrect. I turned another page. This provision limits access to certain assets without disclosing their structure. That creates an imbalance of information. Another page. And this language here, I added, tapping the handwritten note in the margin, is not legal. It is personal. It reflects concern about character, not concern about assets. Ethan's sister shifted uncomfortably. His father frowned. Our attorney drafted that. Your attorney drafted a document based on your perspective, I said. Not on a complete understanding of both parties involved. And what would you suggest? He asked. I would suggest, I said calmly, that if we are going to discuss a legal agreement, it should be drafted with separate counsel, full disclosure from both sides, and terms that protect both people equally. His mother's lips pressed into a thin line. And you expect us to simply accept that? I expect you to recognize that I am not the person you assumed I was, I said. The room went quiet again. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. I don't even know what to say. You could start with the truth, I said. He looked pained. I didn't think it mattered. It mattered to them, I said. And you let it matter without question. His father exhaled slowly. Well, he said, this is unexpected. Yes, I replied, it is. His mother picked up her wineglass, took a small sip, and set it down with care. If what you're saying is accurate, she said, then perhaps we all made some incorrect assumptions. That is one way to describe it, I replied. Her eyes met mine. And you, she added, chose not to correct them. That is also true. A long pause followed. Then she said, I suppose the question now is where we go from here. I considered that. I looked at Ethan, at his father, at his mother, at the contract still resting between us, and I realized something that had nothing to do with rank, money, or legal language. This was no longer about what they thought of me. It was about what I thought of them. I closed the folder gently and set it back down. You asked for clarity, I said. Now you have it. For a moment after I said it, no one moved. The contract sat in the middle of the table like something that had suddenly lost its purpose. Ethan's mother recovered first. She adjusted her napkin, smoothed it once across her lap, and lifted her chin slightly. Well, she said, her voice carefully controlled, this certainly changes the context. Does it? I asked. Her eyes flickered. She had not expected that. Of course it does. We were operating under a certain understanding. Yes, I said. You were. His father leaned forward, resting his elbows lightly on the table. You have to admit, he said, most people would have disclosed something like that. Most people lead with whatever they believe will secure their position, I replied. I chose not to. Ethan looked between us, his face pale. I still don't understand, he said. Why didn't you tell me? Not just them. Me. I turned fully toward him. Because I needed to know who I was building a life with, I said. Not who you would become if you knew my rank. That's not fair, he said. No, I said quietly. What happened tonight was not fair. He flinched at that. His sister shifted in her chair, visibly uncomfortable now. Okay, but this feels like a test, she said. Like you set this up. I didn't set anything up, I said. I accepted an invitation and showed up pretending to be someone else, she said. I held her gaze. I showed up without announcing myself. There is a difference. His mother exhaled slowly. Regardless, she said, we are where we are, and we still need to discuss the future. I nodded once. We do. She leaned forward slightly, gathering back some of her composure. Then let's be practical. If you truly are in the position you claim, then you understand the importance of structure. Agreements, boundaries, families like ours are not unique, I said, gently cutting her off. Her lips pressed together. I have spent my entire adult life working with people from every background you can imagine, I continued. Wealthy, poor, educated, not. What distinguishes them is not what they have. It is how they behave when they believe no one is watching. No one spoke. Ethan looked down at his hands. I shifted my attention back to him. Ethan, I said, my voice softer now, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. He looked up. When your parents decided to present this tonight, I said, tapping the folder lightly, did you agree with them? He opened his mouth, then closed it. I thought it was reasonable, he said at last. Just as a precaution, even knowing what you know about me? I asked. He hesitated. I didn't know this, he said, gesturing vaguely toward me, toward everything I had just revealed. No, I said. But you knew me. That landed harder. He looked down again. I didn't think they were trying to hurt you, he said quietly. That is not what I asked, I replied. Silence stretched between us. Then, slowly, he said, I didn't stop them. I nodded once. That is what I needed to know. His mother leaned in quickly. Ethan was trying to keep the peace, she said. You can't fault him for that. I turned my head toward her. Yes, I said. I can. Her eyes widened slightly. Keeping the peace at the expense of someone else's dignity is not peace, I continued. It is avoidance. His father shifted in his chair. Now, wait a minute, he said. No one intended to compromise your dignity. I met his gaze. You handed me a document designed to limit my place in your family before you understood who I was, I said. You made assumptions about my character based on what I wore, what I said, and what you believed I could offer. That's not, his sister began. It is, I said, still calm. The room fell quiet again. I let it. Then I did something none of them expected. I reached down, slipped the engagement ring from my finger, and placed it gently on the table beside the contract. The small sound it made against the wood seemed louder than anything else that night. Ethan's head snapped up. What are you doing? He asked. I'm pausing, I said. Pausing? His voice cracked slightly. You're taking off the ring in front of my family and calling it a pause? Yes, I said. Why? He demanded. I looked at him without cruelty. Because I don't know whether you are ready to stand beside me, I said. And I am not willing to build a marriage on uncertainty. His mother's face tightened. This is an overreaction. No, I replied. It's a decision. His father leaned forward, his voice firmer now. You are going to walk away from an engagement over a conversation? I am stepping back, I corrected him, because of what that conversation revealed. Ethan shook his head, disbelief and hurt written all over his face. You could have told me, he said again. And you could have trusted me, I said. That was the truth at the center of it all. Not the contract, not the dinner. Trust. I stood slowly and smoothed my skirt. Thank you for the meal, I said to his parents, my voice steady. It was very well prepared. His mother stared at me, speechless now. I picked up my coat from the chair where it had been placed earlier. The worn wool felt heavier in my hands than it had when I arrived. Before I turned to leave, I looked at Ethan one last time. I meant what I said, I told him. This is not the end, but it is not the beginning anymore either. He did not move. None of them did. I walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped into the cold December night. The air struck my face, sharp and clean. Behind me, I heard the door close, and for the first time that evening, I allowed myself to feel it. Not anger, not victory, loss. Because sometimes the hardest part of seeing people clearly is realizing they are not who you hoped they were. The first few days after Christmas were the quietest I could remember in years. Not the peaceful kind of quiet that comes after a long day, when you sit down with a cup of tea and let the world settle around you. This was deeper. The kind of quiet that leaves room for thoughts you have been too busy to face. I returned to base on the morning of December 26th. The routine helped. Briefings were waiting. Reports needed review. A personnel matter delayed over the holiday needed a decision. In my world, responsibility did not pause because it was Christmas. People still needed clarity, direction, someone willing to carry the weight of a decision. So I stepped back into that role without hesitation. In uniform, everything made sense. People stood when I entered a room. Conversations sharpened. Information came to me directly. No one questioned what I contributed or whether I belonged at the table. My authority was not up for debate. It was a fact. There is comfort in that, even if you do not admit it. But when I came home in the evenings, the silence returned. My townhouse felt larger than it had before. The small artificial tree still stood in the corner of the living room, its lights unplugged now, the ornaments catching the faint glow from the street lamp outside. The pie Ethan had brought was still on the counter the first night. I threw it away the next morning. I did not hear from him immediately. That did not surprise me. Ethan was not a man who ran toward difficult conversations. He approached them the way some people approach cold water, slowly, carefully, hoping to adjust before stepping fully in. On the third day, he called. I let it go to voicemail. His message was short. "I'm sorry," he said. "I don't even know where to start, but I'm sorry. Please call me when you're ready." I listened to it once, then I deleted it, not out of anger, out of discipline. Over the years, I had learned that immediate responses often come from emotion, not clarity, and I wanted to understand what I felt before I tried to explain it to him. A week passed. Work filled most of it. Meetings, reviews, long hours that blurred into one another. There were moments when I forgot completely about Christmas dinner, the contract, and the look on Ethan's face when I placed the ring on the table. But then some small thing would bring it back. A couple holding hands in a parking lot, a wedding announcement in the newspaper, a Christmas card sitting unopened on my kitchen counter. By the second week, the calls stopped. Then a letter arrived. It was handwritten. I recognized his handwriting immediately. Careful, slightly slanted, the way he always wrote grocery lists. I placed it on the table and looked at it for a long time before opening it. When I finally did, I read it slowly. He did not try to defend himself. That was the first thing I noticed. He wrote about that night, about what he had seen and what he had failed to see. He admitted he had known about the contract and had convinced himself it was only a formality. He admitted he had been more concerned with avoiding conflict than protecting me. "I thought I was being reasonable," he wrote. "I thought I was keeping things smooth. I didn't realize I was letting you walk into something unfair." He paused there, then continued. "I also didn't realize how much I liked the version of you I thought I knew." That line made me stop. He went on to explain it. He said it had been easier to feel steady, confident, even a little important beside someone he believed needed him. He said he had never asked deeper questions about my work, because he did not want to disturb that balance. "I'm not proud of that," he wrote, "but it is true." I set the letter down for a moment and looked out the window. There it was. Not just an apology. Understanding. That mattered more than anything he could have said in the first few days. The next letter came 4 days later. This one was shorter. "I've started seeing someone," he wrote. "A counselor. I don't think I know how to handle my parents the way I should. I want to learn." He did not ask me to come back. He did not ask me to forgive him. He simply told me what he was doing. That mattered too. By the third week, I had 3 letters. Each one was a little clearer than the last. He wrote about his childhood, about the way his parents made decisions, about how disagreement in their home was handled, not through open conflict, but through quiet pressure. He wrote about learning to keep peace by stepping aside instead of standing up. "I thought that was maturity," he wrote. "I am starting to understand it was avoidance." I read that line twice. Then I folded the letter carefully and placed it with the others. I did not respond, not yet. Around that same time, I received a call I had not expected. Ethan's mother. I let it ring once, twice, then I answered, "Hello." There was a brief pause on the other end. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said. "You're not," I replied. Another pause. "I wanted to follow up," she said, choosing each word with care, "about Christmas." "Yes," I said. "I believe there may have been misunderstandings," she continued. I leaned back slightly in my chair. "In what way?" I asked. "We were trying to be responsible," she said, "and perhaps the way we approached it was too direct." "Directness wasn't the issue," I said. She hesitated. "What was the issue, in your view?" "Assumption," I said. Silence. Then more quietly, "I see." I was not sure she did. I also wanted to say, she added, that we were not aware of your position. I understand that, I said. And had we known, she continued, we would have handled things differently. I let that sit for a moment. Would you? I asked. She did not answer right away. I would hope so, she said finally. That was honest, in its way. Then perhaps the issue wasn't information, I said. It was perspective. Another silence. I suppose, she said slowly. There is some truth in that. We ended the call shortly after. It was not an apology, not yet, but it was movement. The real change came a few days later. A letter arrived from Ethan's father. Typed, not handwritten, brief. I misjudged you, it said. Not because of what you withheld, but because of what I assumed. That is my responsibility. I regret the way that manifested. No explanations, no excuses. Just that. I read it once. Then I set it aside. It was enough, not to repair everything, but to acknowledge that something had been broken. The following week, I called Ethan. We agreed to meet, not at his parents' house, not at mine, at a small diner just off the highway, the kind of place where the coffee is always hot, the booths are worn, and nobody pays much attention to who you are. It felt right. When I walked in, he was already there. He stood when he saw me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, "Thank you for coming." I nodded. And for the first time since Christmas, we sat across from each other with nothing between us. He looked thinner, not in a way most people would notice right away, but I noticed. The lines around his eyes had deepened. His shoulders did not sit as easily as they used to. There was something different in his posture, less certain, more deliberate. He waited until I settled into the booth before he sat again. A waitress came over, poured coffee for both of us without asking, and left us with 2 menus neither of us needed. "Thank you for coming," he said again. "You already said that," I replied, not unkindly. "I know." He gave a small, nervous smile. "I just didn't want to assume." "That is new," I said. He nodded. "I'm trying." We let that rest for a moment. Outside, cars moved steadily along the road. Inside, the low hum of conversation and the soft clink of dishes created a privacy that did not feel forced. Around us, older couples leaned toward one another, sharing stories, finishing meals they had probably ordered the same way for years. It grounded the moment. Ethan wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "I read your face that night," he said, "after the contract. I knew something changed. I just didn't understand what." "Do you understand now?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "More than I did. Not completely, but enough to know I was wrong." I did not respond right away. He continued. "I kept telling myself it wasn't a big deal," he said, "that it was just paperwork, that everybody does it." "Everybody doesn't," I said. "I know that now." He paused. "It wasn't the contract, was it?" "No," I said. "It wasn't. It was me," he said. "It was what you didn't do," I corrected gently. He looked down at the table. "I've been thinking about that," he said. "A lot." I waited. "I always thought I was a good man," he continued, "and in a lot of ways I still think I am. But I'm starting to understand that being good when things are easy doesn't mean much." "No," I said quietly, "it doesn't." He met my eyes. "I didn't stand up for you," he said. "Not because I didn't care, because I didn't want to deal with my parents. I told myself I would fix it later, privately, but by then the damage had already happened." "Yes," I said. "I'm sorry," he said. I believed him. But belief, I had learned, was not the same thing as trust. "What have you done since then?" I asked. He seemed steadied by the question. "I've been seeing a counselor," he said. "Like I wrote. Twice a week at first, now, once." I nodded. "I didn't realize how much of my life I've spent trying to keep everything smooth," he went on. "How much I avoid conflict, especially with my parents." "That is not uncommon," I said. "I know," he replied. "But it is not something I want to keep doing." He took a breath. "I met with a lawyer too," he added. "Not my parents' attorney, my own. That caught my attention." "And?" He explained what a fair agreement actually looks like, Ethan said. "Mutual disclosure, separate representation, terms that protect both people, not just one." "That is correct," I said. "I didn't know that," he admitted. "I just assumed my parents did." "Assumption seems to run in your family," I said. He gave a small, rueful smile. "Yeah," he said. "I've noticed." We sat quietly for a moment, both of us absorbing what had been said. At last, he looked at me again. "I'm not asking you to come back," he said. "Not yet. I know I don't have that right." I appreciated that. "I just wanted you to know I'm working on it," he continued. "On myself, on how I handle things, on how I show up." I studied him. He was not trying to persuade me. He was not trying to charm his way back into my life. He was simply telling the truth as he understood it. That was new. "What about your parents?" I asked. He exhaled slowly. "That has been harder," he said. "But I've started setting boundaries." "In what way?" "I told them I won't discuss our relationship unless you are present," he said, "and that if we ever move forward again, decisions like that," he nodded toward the invisible memory of the contract, "will not happen unless both of us are involved from the beginning." "And how did they respond?" I asked. "My mother was upset," he admitted. "My father didn't say much at first, but he wrote you that letter." "I received it," I said. He nodded. "He doesn't apologize easily," Ethan said. "That was a lot for him." "I know," I said. We fell into another quiet. The waitress returned, refilled our coffee, and asked if we wanted anything else. We both shook our heads. When she walked away, Ethan spoke again. "I don't expect you to trust me right now," he said. "I just want the chance to become someone you can trust again." I let that sit between us. Outside, a truck passed, its headlights sweeping briefly across the window. "Trust is not something you ask for," I said finally. "It is something you build." "I know," he said, "and it takes time," I added. "I have time," he replied. I looked at him for a long moment. There was no certainty in what I felt, no clear answer, but there was something else. Possibility. "I'm not ready to decide anything today," I said. "I understand," he replied. "But I am willing to keep talking," I continued. Relief moved across his face, quiet but unmistakable. "Thank you," he said. I nodded once. We finished our coffee, in a silence more comfortable than the one we had carried in with us. When we stood to leave, he did not reach for my hand. He did not try to close the distance. He simply walked beside me to the door. Outside, the air was cold again, though not as sharp as it had been on Christmas Eve. We stood there for a moment. "Same place next week?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He smiled, small and genuine. "I'll be here," he said. "I know," I replied. And as I walked to my car, I realized something I had not allowed myself to consider before. Not that everything would be easy. Not that everything would be fixed. But that sometimes people can learn. If this story made you pause, even for just a moment, and think about how we treat people when we believe they have nothing to offer, then it has already done something meaningful. If you have ever been underestimated, or if you have ever realized that you underestimated someone else, you are not alone. Stories like this remind us that respect is not earned through titles or money. It is revealed through behavior. If this resonated with you, consider sharing it with someone who might need that reminder today. And if you want to hear more stories about quiet strength, second chances, and the kind of truth that changes people slowly, you are always welcome here.